Hello and welcome to another episode of Korean Politics Debrief with me, Kwon Jang-woo. So, it's been another week and still no verdict from the Constitutional Court on President Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment. It certainly seems the court knows how to be dramatic. So everyone had expected a ruling to come by now, considering that it took the court 11 days to rule on President Roh Moo-hyun's impeachment and 14 days on President Park Geun-hye's. And it seemed that this case was more clear-cut than those others, so it was expected that the ruling would come quickly. But it seems the court won't be rushed and is taking its time, despite much of the nation desperate for this saga to end. The delay has led to all sorts of speculation to swirl. Some said maybe it's because there's a split in opinion and that there's a fierce debate going on, because they want the verdict to be unanimous among the 8 justices. Others have said that the verdict is unanimous already, but they're just taking their time over the exact wording of the ruling to make sure that it's bulletproof, as so much is riding on it. Some have said that they could also be deliberating on what to do with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's impeachment trial, and that both rulings could come on the same day, as they are related. The truth is, it could be any of those reasons, and it could be none. We really have no idea. We are all just speculating. The secrecy around the justices' deliberations have been airtight. There have even been reports on how the court is swept for bugging devices to ensure that the justices can deliberate in confidence. But ultimately, all this speculation is happening because we just need to fill the airtime and newspaper columns with something. We need to be talking about something while we wait, otherwise we might all go a bit mad if we haven't already. There are rumours emerging now that it will be this week. Surely it has to be this week. But again, we really don't know. But in the meantime, tensions, which are already at a boiling point, just gets cranked up a little bit more. The voices at the protests over the weekend just getting that little bit louder. So for this week's pod, we are once again looking at the martial law crisis. Of course, there are other ongoing political issues at the moment, like the latest bill that was vetoed once again by the acting president, tariff tensions with the US, the medical reform backtrack and more. But the impending Yoon impeachment verdict feels like it's sucking all the air and energy away from these issues. It is the issue that looms largest at the moment. And so we are approaching this once again this week, but from a reporter's perspective this time. I'm talking to someone who regular Korea watchers will likely be very familiar with. I spoke to Raphael Rashid, a freelance journalist who has written for many publications and outlets in recent years, including The Guardian, The New York Times, Al Jazeera, Nikkei Asia, and more. And he's known more for covering social issues and causing quite a stir while he's at it. But over the last 3 months, he has delved deep into the martial law crisis and about Yoon Suk Yeol as well. And after speaking to him, it made me think that I'm not sure if there are any other foreign journalists in Korea who have spent as much time on the ground and in as much depth on this issue as Raphael has. It was a fascinating chat, discovering what he's learned about Yoon and what makes him tick, and what could come after the impeachment verdict as well. But first, we talk about his personal story. The following interview was recorded Tuesday, March 11th. Okay, so this week I have with me a fellow SOAS alumni, a journalist, and a good friend, I would say, Raphael Rashid. He is here with me. Raphael, hello, it's great to have you on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so can you introduce yourself in your own words to our listeners, who you are and what you do, essentially?
Yeah, my name's Raphael Rashid. I'm a freelance journalist in Seoul, and I've been living in South Korea for almost 14 years, I would say. Originally, I came here to do my master's in Korean studies. One thing led to another, and then I ended up working in a Korean company for a few years. and eventually transitioned to journalism. And so I've been doing freelance journalism for the last, I don't know, 7, maybe 8 years, I guess. And I guess that's my bread and butter at the moment.
What got you interested into Korean in the first place? You studied Korean at SOAS,
Right.
at the university in the UK in London.
You know, it's a it's a question I get asked a lot, and it's also a question that I ask myself a lot. You know, they say, "Oh, you did Korean studies for your master's. Why did you do that?" "Oh, you did it." Because I did it for my undergraduate, joined with Japanese studies as well. So then it's like, well, why did you do that? I don't really, I don't have a specific answer, but actually, after high school, my original degree was computer science, believe it or not.
Okay.
Just because I thought, well, I think I'm relatively good at math, and, I guess I have to do a degree in this or something related. So the natural progression was engineering. But I absolutely hated it, and I failed all my exams. It was really like a dark time. I don't know, I don't know what the trigger was, but there was like a Korean restaurant near my house, and then I'd have Korean food, and then I wasn't too sure what I was like, they kind of disguised it a bit like Japanese, but it's actually run by Koreans.
Right, okay.
So, I was kind of like introduced indirectly, and then I was just kind of curious one day, and I booked a return ticket in 2005, 2006
Oh, wow.
by
So
myself.
you just decided that.
Just decided, then I got really kind of more into the country, and then I guess because I hated computing so much, then I just had to quit. And then the only kind of choice I had at the time was, well, what do I enjoy, or what are my hobbies these days? It was a difficult choice at the time, but no regrets. Here we are, 18, 20 years later.
Okay, so you kind of fell in love with Korea and you came here, you studied here, you found a job here. But then what drew you to journalism? You never studied journalism or anything like that before,
Yeah,
right? You have no formal training as such.
100%, I don't have any formal training, never been to journalism school. So when I was working in a Korean company, it was a PR agency. So day to day, we are representing the biggest companies in Korea. I was exposed to the world of media, international media, because we were doing a lot of external, outside of Korea communications. But we also did domestic media sometimes, depending on who our client was. So I was also exposed to the Korean, side of things. And I always felt that there were frustrations on both sides, as in when it came to media outside of Korea or things in English, I felt that there was a bit of a gap, not a gap in the market, but there was something lacking, especially, 10, 15 years ago, when you look at, or even when I was studying Korean studies. Of course, it's great to read and research in Korean, but if you're going to look in English, there were only limited resources at the time. Yeah, doing my studies, it was difficult to rely solely on foreign media writing about Korea, because there was clearly, what's happening in Korea is so much, but what's being reported is like 1%. And even that 1% is not good enough for me. So I always felt that there was, more to be said in English. To be clear, I think things have improved tremendously over the past few years, and there's plenty of talent and plenty of storytelling being done in English at a really, really high level. So I think the landscape has completely changed. But that's how it was back then.
I know what you mean. Like back then, it was all like North Korea.
K-pop, plastic surgery.
I guess, there would be some history books. But again, these are all big kind of topics. And no one was really talking about social issues. about what's really affecting Korean people's lives, right? And I feel like that is something that you really brought to the table, that you were really talking about a lot of social issues in Korea.
Yeah, like you just said, a lot of the topics are just these broad topics that usually generate a lot of clicks. I mean, they still do if you have a crazy North Korea story or a failed plastic surgery, you know, those will, of course, generate a lot of attention. But there were the more human stories, day-to-day stories that are not being told. And over the years, I kind of, you know, officially or unofficially, you know, started writing about these issues, sometimes even when I was working at this Korean company, but maybe under a different name.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, and I just felt like loads of people are talking about North Korea, but what about, you know, migrant worker issues or minorities in Korea, all these topics that ultimately I think is in one way or another affects me, because I'm hearing these stories from friends,
right,
or I'm seeing these things on a daily basis, and I think we need to expose these issues.
So in one sense, I guess you were looking to read about those stories, but because you weren't finding them, you felt you would go out and do it yourself, essentially, right?
Basically. So it's being said already. Some of it's already being said in Korean, but yeah, I think it's important to show these voices. I mean, I guess, yeah.
I want to say, yeah, that's the thing. So I feel like you really very much was someone who gave a voice internationally to marginalized people here in South Korea, whether they be migrant workers or women or the LGBTQ community. I felt that was what you were doing and what a lot of other reporters, a lot of other correspondents, Western correspondents weren't doing, especially at the time.
I mean, I guess so. A lot of the stuff that I've raised sometimes doesn't even make it into articles, and that's why I'll probably put it on social media, because ultimately I'm at the mercy of international editors, and sometimes, you know, they have a limited number of articles that they can publish, or certain topics that they will or won't cover. So, you know, like, it's a bit of a mix, and I think these days, I guess journalism's quite a broad, you know, spectrum, and it can be written articles, it can be podcasts, it can be social media as well.
Sure, you have amassed quite a following, 49,000 on Twitter, I'm seeing now, on X, I should say, almost 50,000. And then I'm not sure how many on Blue Sky, but yeah, you really have developed a powerful voice, I would say.
I mean, I just think I'm playing a small part in a huge, you know, picture.
Right.
So, you know, I get a lot of criticism for it.
Sure. I was going to be one of my questions. What have been the positives and negatives of your work and what you do? Because while you have done some pretty amazing work, some great reporting that I'm sure you're proud of, you've also been the target of a lot of abuse as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get regular death threats, but
what do they look like when you say death threats?
I mean, some people will send some emails, you know, anonymous emails saying that they want to, you know, cut me up or, you know, blow up my house or something like that. Otherwise, sometimes it's like through DMs on social media. So a lot of it is like these, you know, comments either under my posts or even on like these forums in Korean. And sometimes the threats come from Korea or Koreans or Korean speakers. And sometimes it comes from outside of Korea, because, you know, you've got a lot of, you know, like diehard Korea boos who just want to defend the country and paint it as a beautiful place. And if I highlight some issues, they're like, you know, who are you to say this? Anyway, I don't really care. I don't know these people personally. As far as I'm concerned, they're just pixels on a screen.
So that you've not had any actual physical confrontation with anyone? No one's actually come up to you and made these threats in person or anything like that?
Yeah, I haven't yet. hopefully never will. The funny thing is, people have a right to not read what I write. They don't need to they don't need to follow me. They don't need to go on my social media. They don't need to read my articles. They can stay in their own bubble if they want, and that's your right. But I don't think, I think when people start to say, well, they can say nasty things, but when they say things that are either untrue or just outright violent, then I'll just block them. But yeah, I haven't, and it's almost like you tell me this online, but why don't you tell this to my face? How come I've never met anybody in Korea telling this to my face?
How do you deal with that? Are you someone who's quite mentally tough, do you think? And secondly, what do you make of that response you get? Why do you think people react in the way that they do to what you do?
Yeah, so I think the first few times I got the abuse, or even like some comment, I was like, oh my God, do people think, I can't believe people think of me that way. And, sometimes you're like, then you go to bed and you're like, oh, why am I being misunderstood? And you just think about it a lot. But then, like I said, I don't know these people. As far as I'm concerned, they are, people who are unrelated to me. And if you knew me, you probably wouldn't think of me in that way. And I'm up for having a coffee to like talk it out. But then when it becomes so regular, I guess I become a bit, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've become quite numb to it and I really don't care.
But why do you think people react in the way they do, you think?
I mean, I guess it depends on who's doing who's doing all the hate talk, but there are segments of, I would say, nationalist Koreans who think that I'm talking down on their country and only talking about the worst possible cases or this or that. And so then they say, you have no right to talk about this. You don't know anything. You get out of this country. So I think that's the main group, are these people who tell me you're not allowed. But
and this all comes from love of Korea, essentially, right? You want Korea to essentially do better.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what I always say is that anything that I would say most of the things that I'm writing about or highlighting have got nothing to do with me. And these are not my stories.
Right.
These are not, and it's actually very difficult to find the most unique story in the world these days. Probably it's been said 100 times before. So when there's say an issue in Korea and people are talking about it, and guess what? Those people are Koreans themselves. So I'm just funneling all of these different voices, making an article. This is not about me.
Right.
So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not, I don't think I'm belittling Korea in any way. And there are plenty of reporters and plenty of articles that portray Korea in such a beautiful way, and I've got nothing against that. I'm just playing a small role, if not, I'm just a fish among hundreds, if not thousands. People say I hate Korea. I think if I hated this country, I wouldn't be here.
Sure. I don't think you hate Korea, definitely far from it. And you may say you're just a small fish, but no, I don't believe that. I feel that you are someone who is playing a big role. You are an important voice. You may rub some people up the wrong way, it seems, but I truly think what you've been doing is pretty amazing, especially as a freelance journalist as well. I imagine that part is hugely challenging, not having the safety net of being a correspondent or a full-time employee of some big media outlets. But the way you're pursuing what you do, the stories you want to tell, I think it's quite inspiring to see, and I definitely hope to see you continue doing what you do. Okay, so let's talk about some of the recent developments here in South Korea now. because it's also quite different from what you normally do, right? Normally, as I said, you've been known to cover social topics, but in the last couple of months, you've not been able to do what you want to do because of the tsunami of news that has come from the President Yoon's martial law decree, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the one story that won't go away and has just mentally and physically preoccupied my mind for the past 3 months plus. Politics, of course, sometimes politics can be not fun, but can be quite dramatic. But there's too many infighting stories and too many scandals, and it's easy to lose track of what's going on. And I try to switch off for all these scandals, but
that's before
martial law. But for this one, I can't stop thinking about it. I've probably become a bit obsessed. I wake up in the middle of the night and then I'm just trying to wonder, why did he do it? And every time I wake up, I kind of have a different answer, and then and then I can't stop thinking about it, and then I can't go to sleep anymore. Simply because as much as we're seeing, we saw in the Constitutional Court all these different hearings and the President Yoon defending himself and bringing out all these excuses, martial law is, he basically said it was a warning to the people, but I just do not see it in that way. You can call it whatever you want, but we all saw what it was, and we all know what could have happened. And martial law is not a walk in the park. It's not a small thing. It's like, it's
not a lever that you pull unless it's
it's
a real emergency.
It's like, I think it's it's almost like a nuclear weapon. Like you're pressing the big red button, and it's not something that you press lightly or easily. The consequences of martial law, in a way, of course, it was all done and dusted within 5 or 6 hours, and some people slept through it, and they had no idea what had just happened, and that their life before going to bed and after waking up was still the same. And I think it's easy to just laugh it off and just pretend it never happened, or just think of it as a hiccup in Korea's democratic history. But I don't think you can brush it off so easily. Had it continued, it had the potential to affect every single one of us. Even me as a journalist. There is a document that I was able to obtain that was published by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it's called the Martial Law Manual. And this martial law manual is an official document that outlines the steps to take when martial law is declared. It's got nothing to do with this government or the previous government. It's just a manual that is updated every 2 years and dictates to military officials what will happen. If you go through this, I can't remember, it's like 150 or 200 pages long. It's very it tells you exactly what's going to happen. And it's basically your freedoms will be taken away. You will have a curfew. You will not be able to leave your house. If you want to use your car, you have to have a permit. If you want to get married, you can, but the purpose of the marriage should not be to a covert, meeting to get together and talk about the government.
Right.
Like everything is highlighted. And then I think it's like the second half of this document outlines all about censorship. And it literally says you are not allowed to criticize the government policy. And if you do, you will be severely restricted. And here's how you will be restricted. You will have this revoked. You will have that revoked. You will, be penalized in this way. And for foreign media, you will get one warning. If you do it again, you will have your visa cancelled and you will be deported. So these are, you know, this is martial law is not a joke. And when you press that button, there's an entire mechanism that, you know, will take place. And so for the president to say that it was just a little, you know, little casual warning, I think is ridiculous. So yeah, I think, of course, we could frame this as a political issue, but I think it's a lot more than that. It would have affected every single one of us. And that's why I've, you know, spent the past 2-3 months trying to understand why on earth did he do it.
So what have you made of what he did? You've, as you said, been obsessing over this for the last 2-3 months. You've been talking to plenty of people, his supporters and senior officials. What have they been saying? What have you kind of pieced together yourself?
You know, it's I've met over the past maybe 2 months, I've met specifically to answer these questions. I've met about 35 people, a lot of lawmakers, lawyers, former prosecutors, people who know Mr. Yoon, people who knew him, grew up with him, worked with him, and some of these people overlap, and some of them have become lawmakers these days. It's a big picture, and it's difficult to put it all together. But if we can summarize, I think Mr. Yoon is a deeply insecure person, and he has been obsessed with wanting to look like he's the best. I will refrain from saying he was the best, but he looked like he was the best. And
right.
I think
he made it all the way to Prosecutor General.
But he made it, you know, personally, I think there's a bit of fake it till you make it, because, you know, people say, well, he went to Seoul National University, so he must be really bright. But I don't think you need to be, just because you go to a top university doesn't mean you're the brightest person in the world. He did make it all the way to Prosecutor General, but he's deeply insecure, and a lot of people who I spoke to who know him personally or directly or had interactions with him tell me that he is an extremely heavy drinker. And when you go to meetings or some kind of gathering for dinner, the booze just keeps on coming out. And I think the ratio, he does those bomb shots of beer and soju. Apparently the ratio is 1-to-1, and in a single sitting it can be up to 20 of these, and then it'll keep on coming. He will dominate the conversation, and again, because he's an insecure person, he will mask his insecurities by imposing himself. He's a very imposing person who will demand that people, you know, you have to drink, and he'll order loads of fancy and expensive food. And so he builds this kind of aura, and then people can't talk back at him. He's got a very, very eruptive temper. He will explode the moment you confront him or say something that he doesn't like. And so even as Prosecutor General, or as a prosecutor, many people observe these kind of traits as someone who was, I mean, I think he's a bully, to be honest.
So that was one of my questions that I had in my mind was, did he maybe change after he became president or after he became the presidential nominee? Was he different when he was a prosecutor? Because he moved up the ranks and became Prosecutor General. Was he always the same person as he was back then as he is now, or has something changed in him?
I think there's a bit of remnants of the past. So he's brought his prosecutorial mindset to the presidency. He sees the world in a very black and white way, enemy, you know, friend versus foe. And if you are an enemy, you are against me. But because he, like, for example, now he he believes he represents this. I mean, he does represent the state, but he believes that an attack against him is an attack against the state. And I guess, you know, we can, in his martial law declaration, he talks about anti-state forces, but I think there's a lot of, well, it's, if you're anti-me, you're anti-state. So I think there's his rigid mindset, binary mindset from his days as a prosecutor, I think translate into the way he runs things as president. But at the same time, if you look back when he was a prosecutor, I'm not too sure if he was a very political person at the time. And I think it's, I mean, there might have been signs or not of, you know, his political inclinations, but as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't very evident or obvious. And actually, a few people I've spoken to have said, if you were to classify here, you know, to try and figure out what his political inclinations, he might actually be considered progressive, and his wife as well. But then he just ended up becoming this presidential candidate
for the Conservative
Party,
for the People Power Party. I mean, there was, I think, some debate when he first emerged as a political figure whether which side of the divide he would be on, actually, the political aisle.
I think, you know, I think even in Western media, and I won't lie, even in some of my articles as well in the past, you know, I've just said, oh, he's an arch conservative. But looking back, I don't even think he is personally, I don't even think he's a conservative. I don't think he's anything. I think he's an opportunist. I think he's a kind of populist who will just go with the flow and see where it goes. So he got selected by the PPP. So, okay, well, here I am. I'm a conservative. But, you know, coming back to the martial law, I don't think, because right now we're seeing, you know, deep polarization, right, or even more deepening polarization, and it's being twisted or being framed as this political thing, left versus right, and both sides are like literally killing one another even more. But I don't think this martial law has got anything to do with politics. What he did was not a political act. It was his own, in his own craze or whatever you want to call it. He did it, and it was his decision, and this has got nothing to do with politics. But then now, and I guess over the past few years as president, because he's, if you don't like what I do, you're fired, you know, get out. And, you know, he'll be very aggressive about it to just let people go. And that's why I think you see a lot of the kind of fighting with some conservative politicians, or a lot of these top people, they become quite distant.
Right. So this comes from speaking to all those people that you mentioned earlier, right? This is the picture you've built after speaking to the people who are close to him.
Yeah, this is, you know, after having many, many hours of conversations with dozens of people who know him or knew him, and these are themes that keep on coming up again and again and again from people who are unrelated to one another but paint exactly the same story from different points in his life. And so I think we have kind of a fair picture of who Yoon is as a person.
You've obviously given a lot of thought over President Yoon and why he did what he did and the kind of person that he is. I also know that you've been reporting a lot on the protests as well in recent weeks, right? You've been attending the protests, covering the protests, you've been talking to the people as well. What has that been like?
Oh, God. I mean, it's, you know, I can't deny it. There is, and I don't think this is me being political, there is one clear side that is extremely agitated, if not violent. And there's one side that is more cheerful and a bit more like civil. The pro-Yoon side is the aggressive side. And I can't, people say, oh, but, he was trying to protect the country. You can say what you want, it was his democratic right to protect the country. Maybe that's what you think, but why be so violent about it?
You've seen it firsthand, right? You've been to the protests, you've been to both sides.
It's so ugly. I've been to both sides, and I do believe in, talking to both sides.
Sure.
But
how often have you been to these protests?
I've been to probably, I don't know, 10 or 15. And, I staked out outside the residence before he was arrested and when he was arrested. And, people are so aggressive, they will come to you. And then, because right now, the far right, some of them, I believe, they are becoming extremists, and they don't even believe in mainstream media. They believe all mainstream media, including conservative mainstream media, they believe they are the enemies. And so
they've rejected the traditional conservative
legacy,
newspapers.
all of them.
조중동, 조선일보, 동아일보, 중앙일보.
And
they've even rejected Channel A and TV Joseon.
all of them. And so now they proudly say that they rely and depend on YouTube as their source of real legitimate information, often from these really, really far right channels that are very insightful. Some of them are inciting violence. And so when you go to these protests, they're like, who are you? Are you a journalist? And then, some people are grabbing me, and they're like,
they were physically grabbing you?
Physically, get out. So I'm like, okay, don't touch me. So that's one, it wasn't too bad. But then sometimes they're like, oh my God, foreign media, we love you. Please tell the truth to the outside world. Please show what's happening in Korea. And they believe that foreign media, because we can't trust legacy Korean media, maybe they will. But every time I go to these protests, I'm like, okay, why are you holding this Stop the Steal sign? And they're like, oh, because the Chinese make what Chinese? What are you talking about? CCP out, China out, all these allegations. And trust me, I am the first person to listen to any legitimate argument, so long as you present the evidence to me. But I have yet to see it.
Why do you think it's gotten so extreme? What have you made sense of how the people are reacting to what's going on? We've talked about President Yoon, but what have you made sense of the pro-Yoon supporters? Because I think that keeps me up. Because President Yoon, he's one person. One person can be like that. But we are seeing a whole swathe of the population following this movement almost, I would say.
I think it's sad because a lot of people genuinely believe what they are being fed.
Okay. How do you think it's gotten there?
I've some of the people I spoke to, they were literally crying in front of me because they are so devastated that the communists have invaded this country. So it does make me sad. And I also think that some of these YouTubers, and you can check the analytics, there are some analytical tools that tell you how much they're making. And you can see that since December 3rd, their earnings have spiked up. So these are monetized, they're businesses, and they're making a lot of money out of people's naivety, or whatever you want to call it. I understand that many people have grievances in society in general, and it doesn't matter what that grievance is, but it's so easy to find a scapegoat and just blame someone for all of your troubles or troubles in society. And so when you have someone as powerful as the president who is whipping out all of these conspiracies, then it must be true. And I just feel sad that he's still, even after the martial law, is gone, he's still, even whether it's from detention or from his residence, still instigating these crowds and legitimizing these claims. And I guess the other sad thing is that it used to be limited to a lot of elderly people. You'd see them in Gwanghwamun every Saturday, often led by these radical far-right pastors.
And this was even before the martial law.
Before the martial law. So these people have always existed, and even this kind of election fraud stuff has always existed, but it's been a fringe. The sad thing, and I think concerning thing, is that a lot of young people have joined in now.
Right.
And I think it's easy to frame it as like, oh, the angry young men have joined. I don't think that's a fair representation. If you go to these protests with young people, plenty of women as well, plenty of angry women, angry young men. It's sad that they have embraced this so much. And I think it's to do, with their their grievances or unhappiness in their daily lives, and they're just trying to find an excuse. Whereas the previous generation of protesters, they were the older ones who are just led by these fanatical, evangelical pastors doing their own thing. But I think now it's gone further, and also with young people, it goes, there's a lot of YouTube, a lot of social media going on. I don't think things are going to get better in the short term.
I think it's particularly dangerous having younger people involved as well. We saw from the storming of the courthouse that it was people in their 20s and 30s, men in their 20s and 30s, instigating that violence, going in and smashing the place up and threatening the court justice. So I think that is definitely a concern. You talk about how you were accosted at these protests, that they try to grab you, but how really dangerous do you think they are? Because I recently did go to a protest with an American reporter, and he was surprised at how quote-unquote peaceful it was compared to protests he's covered in other countries in the US. That it was generally, for most people, that it was quite positive. It was...
What side was that on?
It was both sides.
Okay,
We went to both sides, but maybe it was just a day where it was a bit more quieter. But he felt that it wasn't as violent as some of the other protests he's seen around the world. So we talk about reports about, some journalists being harassed. You talk about how, they grabbed you. But do you think they would have actually gone further than that?
Yeah, so I do think, like you mentioned, I do think on both sides it can be quite respectful. And, I even went to the pro-Yoon side, and then they were offering me cup noodles and tea and all this stuff. So I don't think the aggressive ones are the majority, but and I think, it can look very well organized compared to other countries on both sides. But what I have noticed, and I would love, I don't have the capacity to look into this, but I do believe that there are professional instigators being planted in these protests. And what I mean by that is I have noticed that there are several key people. You recognize their face. You see a crowd of people, okay, stop the steal, or, fake impeachment, whatever. Okay, you can do whatever you want. But then you have these people who enter with a microphone and a speaker, and then they go to the front, and then they start to hype up the crowd. They get really excited. And then, but what's clever about these people is that they never say something incriminatory like, go attack, or like break it all down. They don't say it because they know probably that there's cameras on them, and that if something does happen, then they will get the responsibility. And then somebody in the crowd might erupt because they are so angry. And then I've seen it. You'll have an old man who'll be like, I can't take it, and then start to like hit a police bus. And had he hit it too hard, it would have smashed. If it smashes, then maybe someone else will be like, well, maybe I should do it as well. And then it could have just erupted from there. And then these instigators will quietly see themselves out of the situation. Luckily, even on the pro-Yoon side, there are some reasonable people who are like, don't do that, please don't do that. And I've seen kind of infighting, please don't fight, please don't be violent. So yeah, I believe, especially the courthouse riot, I do believe that they were instigators who basically told
Right.
made the crowd do what they did, and I think the same is happening for the Constitutional Court.
I guess we can't say, whether you feel maybe they're being paid to that way, or are they doing it in their own capacity?
Who knows? Some people say that they're paid. Some say that churches are paying money. I've heard plenty of stories. I cannot confirm any of them.
Right.
But it's easy to instigate, even not just about this case, but whether it's like the cancel culture when it comes to celebrities who make mistakes. You'll have these YouTubers
Right.
who just want to stir up a bit of a storm, and then they'll dox these celebrities online, whether it's true or not, and then they will let their minions do the rest and keep their hands clean.
It's funny, I've heard similar conspiracy theories from the other side as well, how conservatives would say that the progressive marches, the liberal kind of protests, they're being paid for by someone, that their unions are kind of orchestrating them, that there's some nefarious force who are paying them to come out and protest. And obviously we can't confirm that ourselves at the moment here, but I'm guessing that there could be similar things happening on both sides.
Could be, and I think everyone has the right to protest and to voice their support or
Right.
opposition, but I think it needs to be done in a peaceful manner. So yeah, I really don't care what side of the fence you're on, but just don't resort to affecting someone else's livelihood and potentially resorting to violence.
But you feel like it's bubbling right at the surface, right? Like, for example, we don't know what's going to happen yet with the impeachment vote. We think that he will most likely be impeached, although we don't know when that's going to come now. It looks like it's going to be delayed further. We thought it was going to come out this week, but the verdict might come out later. But when the verdict does come, and let's say he's impeached, what do you think the reaction will be like?
I was there 8 years ago, when Park Geun-hye was, when she was removed, and there was a bit of a riot at the time, and buses were completely smashed.
4 people died,
Yeah,
if I remember.
3 or 4 people died. There was, one person fell from the roof of the station. One speaker had these massive speakers that fell on someone. It was a bit of a chaotic situation, and people were climbing on top of buses, and there were scuffles with police. So I think police are going through, how can I say, they're preparing kind of unprecedented possible scenarios of what's going to happen, and so they're rolling out unprecedented security measures.
I've heard reports of 10% of the
entire police
force of the whole nation being prepared for that day.
Yeah, they're doing that. They might close Anguk Station. I think they're closing the nearby gas stations.
I think
schools.
They're giving 100-meter berth of the Constitutional Court as well, that they'll be banning protests within 100 meters of the court.
So I think the protests are going to be separated, obviously, and regardless of what direction the verdict goes in, people on one side or the other will clearly be very upset. But I do think that the police have, are thinking this through properly and creating these barriers.
So do you think the police are equipped to handle it?
No, I think they'll be ready to handle it properly. I don't know if it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Like, you hype up in the media that there's potential clashes, potential collisions coming. So then people might be like, oh, then maybe this is a good excuse for me to do something. I think the threats are legitimate. Some people, some idiots online are just instigating and saying, let's smash the courts and the court justices.
Not just idiots online. The pastor
Yeah,
Chang Wang-un. He's saying, not, I'm guessing, directly saying we should smash up the court, but he's saying it figuratively.
Yeah,
and therefore
so,
people kind of are connecting the dots.
yeah, there's different. There's also some People Power Party lawmakers who are also making some quite violent rhetorics on stage, saying, I think, one guy physically said, smash up the Constitutional Court and the National Election Commission. I just hope nothing bad happens, and I hope that police are well prepared. I don't want to speculate and say that there will be violence, but we have to prepare. I think authorities have to prepare for that eventuality.
I've been thinking about the possibilities recently as well, and in a way, I think it might even be a small blessing that President Yoon has been released and that he's back at the residence, because I think that might split where the pro-Yoon supporters go on that day of the impeachment trial verdict. I'm sure some will obviously go to the courthouse, but some will go to his presidential residence to show his support, show their support for him. And so that might kind of split up the group a little bit.
Hopefully. I mean, his release the other day was a bit, I guess, came as a surprise, but
I mean, yeah, that's not the statement. I think,
I think it's...
there was a mad scramble from everyone that day.
Unfortunately, I don't think it's... I'm hoping that the situation will become more calm, and regardless of what the outcome of any decision is. But now that we're seeing claims, the court says that there are procedure issues in the criminal trial, procedural issues in his arrest, I think it's just going to make things worse, because now obviously the Democratic Party is not happy. They're saying, the prosecutor general should be impeached. And it's like the whole point of this, whole point of martial law apparently was because of the evil opposition parties and their chain impeachments. And so, it is true that when the Democratic Party doesn't like something, then the first solution is impeachment. And so, it's just fanning the flames even more.
It certainly ratcheted up tensions a notch, I feel.
And I feel like now that we're seeing the word, issues with procedures, I think now that will be used as a perfect excuse if and when the impeachment is upheld at the Constitutional Court. Then people will be like, oh, there were issues in the way it was done, so it was illegal.
Let me get your sense on that now finally as well. Do you think he will be impeached? Because the first guest I had on the pod, Professor Cho Hee-yeol, she was 100% confident that he would be impeached, and the general consensus is that he will. But I still have a nagging doubt about the possibility that his impeachment will not be upheld. And all the events of the last few days, him being released as well, I feel that's putting pressure on the situation as well. Do you have any sense at all of something like that possibly happening?
I think, well, first of all, I do not know what's going to happen.
Right.
I think if you, I'm not a legal expert, but if you put it one-on-one on paper and you look at what the situation is, I don't see how he can get away with what he did on that day. And I think it's very clear what he did, and everyone could see it on TV, what happened. So I don't think he can get away with that. And I think the logical outcome would be impeachment. But I am not a legal expert, and I don't know what the procedures and what the law says and doesn't say.
What do you think would happen if Yoon is not impeached then?
If he's not impeached...
What do you think would be the reaction from the public? We've talked about how the pro-Yoon supporters are more agitated than the pro-impeachment camp that you've seen. But do you think there is a possibility that the pro-impeachment protesters could get violent?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate, but I don't think either side will be satisfied with the outcome. There'll be one side that won't be satisfied. But to be honest, what I do fear is if he is not impeached, if he is not removed, what I do fear is what will happen next. Because if the court basically rejects it, then it will give a kind of motivation to show that martial law was legitimate. And I genuinely fear that he could easily do it again.
Right, so if he is reinstated, as you said, I mean, it would be an incredible situation. He
could just do it straight away.
Right. He'd be the leader of the country again, and he
I've
do it.
And I've spoken to many journalists, Korean journalists, who say they genuinely fear that he will declare martial law and that they will have to go into hiding. And I know people have already planned kind of escape routes. I mean, it sounds a bit crazy, but I do think that these are things to consider, as extreme as they may be. And I think the court will have to consider that as well, not just what he did, but what they will have to weigh, if we reinstate this guy, how society will become if we do. And I think that they're going to have to look at that carefully as well.
For people who know their history, the reporters who know their history, there were stories of how producers and news shows were preparing to do their shows on the morning after martial law. If it hadn't been revoked, that they would have had to barricade the doors to continue broadcasting as long as they could, because they knew what it could be like.
Right.
And for a lot of people, I don't think they kind of realize, as you said, what martial law really means. The fact that people were even considering that tells us a lot about the possibilities of what could happen if martial law were to happen again.
Yeah, and we had a taste of it for 6 hours, and I think if he's capable of doing it once, he's capable of doing it again. And the fact that he still maintains that what he did was a legitimate act of governance, it means he could do it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche, but I really do think this is a huge crossroads for the nation, far more so than with President Park Geun-hye's impeachment, because there really wasn't that much of a fight as much back then. So much pressure is on the Constitutional Court right now. If only they would get to their decision soon. The nation is stuck in limbo at the moment. It very much feels like, and everything's at standstill while we wait for those 8 justices to reach their conclusion. So I know the situation hasn't concluded yet, and there's a lot of things still left to play out, it seems. And I feel like I'll be coming back to you again for a future pod to look back and what's gone on. But just your final takeaways from this crisis so far. Where do you think it leaves the nation? Perhaps that's too big of a question, but where are you at the moment on this crisis?
I think the impeachment is only one part of the wider story, and it almost doesn't matter what the verdict will be. The situation before the martial law and after the verdict will still be the same, and that situation is a severely divided country, severely polarized in the politics. The animosity on the two sides is the same, if not worse, and I think these are going to be the big tasks ahead for this country or for whoever becomes president. And I don't think it's something that you can solve overnight, let alone through one presidency. But yeah, I think, if anything, the martial law has exposed how deep these divides are and to what extremes people are willing to go to fight their grounds and declare martial law. I guess it shows how dangerous deep polarization has become to the point where we had martial law. So yeah, regardless of the outcome, I think we really need to be focusing and looking at how we can bring the two sides together and try to find some form of middle grounds or harmony between two sides, because division will do no favors for anyone.
Well, as I said, I already know that I want you back on the pod again in the future, especially once this is all over. But in the meantime, I really appreciate you sharing your time with me today and our listeners, and also sharing your experiences as well. Thanks again. Good luck with the rest of your reporting, and most importantly, stay safe out there as well.
Thank you so much.
Shortly after recording this interview, I ended up walking past the Constitutional Court, which was nearby, and I saw the anti-impeachment protests. It was a Tuesday afternoon, so the crowd wasn't huge, maybe a couple of hundred people, mostly elderly, just chanting in front of the courthouse. But on the fringes of the protest, there were a couple of individuals, men in their 60s or 70s, who were particularly boisterous and agitated. They were hurling abuse, not at the courthouse or the police even, but at random strangers walking past. They were accusing them of being communist sympathizers or Chinese spies. One elderly gentleman in particular was red in the face, veins in his neck throbbing, fingers jabbing. He seemed to be hurling these expletives with every sinew in his body. It wasn't just anger, it was something nastier, more poisonous. It was also the randomness of the abuse that was unsettling, directed at anyone who looked suspicious or looked at them funny. It got me wondering, once again, why were they so angry? Where did this rage come from? It almost felt like, actually, that it was beyond anything to do with Yoon's impeachment. This was about a deep-seated rage that was being released, pure emotion. It felt like Yoon's impeachment was just something that suddenly gave them a cause, a license to let this anger out, like it was now acceptable to act in this way at this place. To be fair, most of the protesters were not like this. Some tried to calm these individuals down, and some were even friendly to people passing by. But as Raphael said, individuals can cause an incident or incite a reaction, and the fear is that they could escalate the situation, leading to more dangerous consequences. I felt like what I saw in these people was a more visceral, emotional response rather than a political one, but the repercussions are ultimately political. I worry about what will happen on the day of the impeachment verdict. We will, of course, see when that will be first. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Raphael today. Look for him on X and Blue Sky and his pieces for The Guardian and more. I'll be back next week, perhaps with a reaction to the verdict. Finally, who knows? But in the meantime, if you have any questions or suggestions for the pod, reach out to me on koreanpoliticsdebrief@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. This podcast has been created, produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kwon Jang-woo. Bye for now.